those on, if you haven't got a list, we appreciate certainly Debbie that takes the time. This is, it's an opportunity list. That's what I call it. It's an opportunity list to kind of get a comprehensive view of what's going on in the body as far as those in need of prayer, those in need of visits, those in need of encouragement. It's an opportunity list, and I think it certainly helps me to be able to see, because there's no way you can know in a congregation this size, you could possibly know what's going on in everyone's lives. But through this, we've got a very good picture, and I appreciate you getting that information to Debbie, and Debbie getting that information to all of us, so that we can carry out our responsibilities as a body. Of course, Doug Mansfield and Dwayne's trip was delayed. Mary, of course, passed away, Mary Cody, and so her funeral was Friday, and they will be leaving Wednesday to head down to Panama, Lord willing. Scott Pena, he has left yesterday, and I believe Roseanne was telling me on Facebook he got there safely, and so that was good. And we had not only of course James' wife to die, but Nancy's brother and Elizabeth's sister-in-law, her husband's sister, who had died, and those funerals were Saturday out of state. And so we want to keep these families in our prayers. And there's a list of people who are still taking chemotherapy, and we want to remember all of these on this list. Is there anyone we need to add that has not been added to this list? Yes. Her name is Sandy Martin. Okay. Sandy Martin has cancer, taking chemo. So let us remember her, add her to your list. Also have one more that has been given to me. Artist's fiance, Robert Glass, is in the VA hospital in Louisville with colon issues. So prayers appreciated for Robert Glass. He is the new minister up at Mason County, and I think he said the first Sunday they were there, they had 9 visitors. That's probably doubled their attendance, I would think, but that was good news. Okay, anyone else? Alan, would you lead us in a prayer, please? Amen. We're in the book of Habakkuk. I was looking up pronunciation there. I wanted to see, how do you say this guy's name? Well, if you go to Strong's, it's Habakkuk. But if you go to Harper's pronunciation guide, it is Habakkuk, which is the way we're going to go with, because that's the one I hear a lot. I don't know why there's a difference, but I'm not a Hebrew scholar, and we'll just go with that Habakkuk, okay? So we're going to study this book this Sunday. Jerry will pick up next week. I believe on Zechariah, I think, is following that. Zephaniah will be following. So he'll have that next week, Lord willing. Does anyone need a sheet? Because the overhead, there is no overhead. It is the sheet, which is all you would have gotten. If you need a sheet, Doug, who's got sheets back there? Anyone? If you'll kind of put your hand up if you need one. If you want one, you may not want one. And that's okay too. But we do provide these for anyone who would like to study and write these things down. This fellow's name, it means embrace, to embrace. Some believe that could mean someone who is comforting to the nation, and the idea that God is a comfort to his nation, and he embraces them through this prophet. And so that's kind of the idea maybe for the name. Here is a fellow that was the prophet of Judah. There was no northern kingdom at this point. They had already been taken into captivity. So there's just the southern kingdom. And he has this kingdom to work with. And Syria has already been taken, or it probably has fallen by the time of this book. He is believed to be, we don't know a lot about him, but he is believed to even also be a Levite because of several things in chapter 3. He writes a prayer song, just like you would, a Levite would, or David would, those psalms that you read about, the 150 psalms. And he uses some of the same wording in those that they would use. And so it's possible that he was a Levite. Also, the date of this book. Where does this fall? Well, some people believe it falls between 612 and 606. So to give you a little timeline here. In 6012 BC, Assyria fell to Babylon. So that's about what's happening, about to happen, or has happened when this book is being spoken and written. The invasion is still to come as far as on God's people. Chapter 3 and verse 16. It is believed to be during the reign of Jehoiakim, 608 and 607 BC. In 605, Babylon will come into the area of Judah, Palestine area, and conquer that area. And in 597, they would have control of the city of Jerusalem. And so this is believed to have been written before any captives had been taken away into Babylon. But Babylon is right there. They are the kingdom taking over the Assyrians. And so that's kind of where we're at historically speaking. Key verses to this book. You'd have to go to chapter 2 and verse 4, where it says, the just shall live by faith. There are at least 3 New Testament books that tell us this very verse, now used in a different context. Romans chapter 1 and verse 17. Galatians chapter 3 and verse 11. Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 38. And so those are 3 examples, and you kind of have to read the context of the book to see how they use this phrase out of Habakkuk. Another key verse would be chapter 2 and verse 20. And this is where we kind of get a song actually from this verse. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silent before him. And so those are what I believe to be the 2 key verses in this chapter. And you could even end the last 3 or 4 verses of chapter 3 too. I would like that as well. Just a few miscellaneous things I would put in here. This book is different from the other books that Jerry has shared with us, or at least most of the books of the minor prophets, in that this is Habakkuk bringing the complaint of the people to God, rather than God saying through the prophet, here's the problem that's going on in the nation. So it's going the other direction, isn't it? And so he's taking this complaint from the people to God. He has been called for that reason. He has been called the troubled prophet. He has been called the complaining prophet. He has also been referred to as the honest doubter. His contemporaries would be Jeremiah, Huldah, that's spelled Huldah, and Zephaniah would be his primary contemporaries. There's probably some overlap with others. Key words in this book. The word why, that is used in these first 3 verses. The word faith, used in chapter 2 and verse 4, as we noted, was a key verse. The word woe, used in chapter 2, 5 times in verses 6 through 19. And the word yet, meaning yet to be, in chapter 2, verse 3, as well as chapter 3 and verse 18. This is about to come, but it has not yet come. Okay, now we're going to get your help. We're going to look at, first of all, what was the first complaint that Habakkuk had? What did he bring to God from the people and on his behalf? Now, I'm going to read this out loud, verses 1 through 4, and you tell me what the complaint is and why. The burden which the prophet Habakkuk saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry, and you not hear? Even cry out to you violence, and you shall not save. Why do you show me iniquity and cause me to see trouble? For plundering and violence are before me. There is strife, and contention arises. Therefore the law is powerless. Justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous. Therefore, perverse judgment proceeds. Okay, what's complaint number 1? What is the complaint? Okay, unanswered prayers. That would have to be a part of that first complaint. God, we've been praying to you about this. We've been praying to you about this. You still haven't done anything about it. You haven't heard our prayer, answered our prayers. Okay, that would be a part of that. But what specifically is the complaint? What's that? Okay. Wickedness. The wickedness surround the righteous. Wickedness is rampant. It doesn't appear that righteousness really matters right now among the people. And so the righteous, and Habakkuk, this prophet, is crying out to God, you know, how long are you going to let this go on? And so what are you going to do against this wicked nation? They need something done to stop this. Okay? You could also use the Psalm 73 here, where why do the wicked prosper? Because they seem to be growing in numbers and seem to have a hold on the nation, and they did. What are some of the specific things he mentions here that are wicked? Some specific things he mentions. Plundering, okay, taking from someone, going over there, just stealing, taking whatever belongs to someone else. What else? What is it? strife and contention, fighting in the nation, fighting among the people. Okay? And someone else said something over here. Violence. Okay? People are violent. Now, we're not talking about the world here. He's talking about the nation of God, and this is how he's describing the nation. And so he's not describing a heathen nation. He's describing God's people, and that's not good, is it? Okay, the law is being ignored, disobeyed. Okay? Those are some specific things he mentions here. Okay, now that's the complaint. That's the complaint. God, how can you allow these injustices to continue among your people? Now, let's go on and let's read verses 5 through 11. Look among the nations and watch. Be utterly astounded. Now, this is God speaking here. I will work a work in your days which you will not believe, though it were told you. For indeed I am raising up the Chaldeans, a bitter and hasty nation, which marches through the breadth of the earth to possess the dwellings that are not theirs. They are terrible, they're dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity proceed from themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards. They're more fierce than evening wolves. Their chargers charge ahead. Their cavalry comes from afar. They fly as an eagle that hastens to eat. And they all come for violence. Their faces set like the east wind. They gather captives like the sand. They scoff at kings. Princes are scorned by them. They are derided. Every stronghold, for they heap up earthen mounds and seize it. And then their minds changes and he transgresses. He commits offense, ascribing this power to his God. Okay, what is God's answer? What is God's answer to this complaint? Okay, wait until you see what's about to happen. Okay? What else? What else might you add? He tells them, I will work. But he also says, I am raising up these Chaldeans. Now, God's always ahead of us, isn't he? God knew this before even Habakkuk made his complaint. God's already doing something. He said, I am in the works already. And this work is going to happen. And so, I am working is the answer. You think I'm doing nothing? You think I haven't heard your prayer? It's on its way. As Tom said, wait and see. It's going to happen. Yes. True. We want an immediate answer. It is not immediate. It's still several years away. Yes. Right. Oh, yes. So let's throw a party. We're going to have an invasion here. So that's not a very fun thing, is it? But he told him to be looking, watching among the nations. That's where the answer's coming. So God did answer. God did answer this complaint, in that I am doing this, and it's coming. You keep looking, you keep watching. It is coming. So, okay. I like how in verse 8 he describes this invading nation, which is basically the description here. He describes them as swift leopards, fierce wolves, and they fly as eagles. I don't know if you ever listened to the Steve Miller Band or anything like that, but they eat the prey, swoop down on their prey. They fly swiftly and get their prey. So, interesting pictures of an invading army. Okay, complaint number 2. here is complaint number 2. Verse 12. Now we're back to Habakkuk, the prophet speaking to God. Okay, this is what you're doing. Are you not from everlasting, O God, my Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, you have appointed them for judgment. O Rock, you have marked them for correction. You are of purer eyes than to behold, and cannot look on wickedness. Why do you look on those who deal treacherously? And hold your tongue when the wicked devours a person more righteous than he? Why do you make men like the fish of the sea, like creeping things that have no ruler over them? They take up all of them with a hook. They catch them in their net. They gather them in their drag net, and they rejoice and are glad. They sacrifice to their net. They burn incense to their drag net. Because of them, their snare is sumptuous, and their food plentiful. Shall they therefore empty their net and continue to slay nations without pity? I will stand my watch. I will set myself on the rampart and watch to see what he will say to me and what I will answer when I am corrected. Okay, now we got complaint number 2. Now what stands out here? Right. That's true. Yeah, I think verse 13 is part of it. If you're a holy God, verse 12, how can you let a pagan nation, that serves idols and kill without pity? How can you let them do this to your people? You're too holy for that, aren't you? To let such ungodliness take place. And then he asked I think a secondary underlying question in verse 17 is that, will you allow them to continue this, to slay the nations without pity? So that's his complaint to God. Holy God use an unholy pagan nation to punish his people. In verse 13, he talks about the Chaldeans. They deal treacherously. Some translations have cruelties translated there. They are making themselves idols. Chapter 2, verses 18 and 19. They worship the very net. They're bringing these things in. You kind of have to go back to the book of Daniel, and if you remember, we talked a little bit Sunday night before last, but King Nebuchadnezzar puffed up, and he started beating his chest, and Nebuchadnezzar said, "Look what I have done. This is my kingdom, and I did this." And I think that's the idolatry. Part of that idolatry he talks about is they worship. We're conquering, we're slaying. Of course, he uses the fish analogy here. Habakkuk does. We're like fish, just taken in and cast aside. He says in chapter 1 and verse 7, he describes them as terrible and dreadful. So these are just some of the descriptions of this nation. And he wants to wait and see. Now, how are you going to answer this? And then I'll see what I'm going to say next. Okay, now, how did God answer that question? Okay, now we go, I'm not going to read all of chapter 2, but I'm going to read part of it. Here's what God's answer to him in verse 2 and 3. The Lord answered me and said, "Write the vision, make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it will speak, it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry." Verse 4, "Behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith." Okay? God is telling them they're coming. He doesn't really explain, I guess in a pointed way, why are you using these unholy people to punish your people, which are unholy, by the way, very unholy. He said, just write it down. They're coming. This is my punishment for them. And then he turns right around in verses 4 through 19, which we're not going to read all of that. He gives 5 woes now to Babylon, or the Chaldeans. I'm going to turn right around because he is prideful, because this man is not upright. I'm going to punish him. So not only is he going to punish God's people, I'm going to punish the punisher. And so he gives 5 woes, and that is in chapter 6 and through verse 8. The first one is woe to him, and I guess we summarize it this way. Yes, is in chapter 2. He gives 5 woes because he is prideful and he is arrogant. He's not upright. So he's going to be punished. 1 woe is given to him who lustfully conquers. You know, he murders and he plunders. So he's just he is what he is. He's just a conqueror who runs through people. Who cares about these people, right? He's got land and he gets to rule over all of these people. So he's not a gracious person, obviously. Woe number 2 is in verses 9 through 11. It is an empire that's built on killing and greed. And so he pronounces a woe on them again. Woe number 3 is in verses 12 and 13. The king accomplishes exactly what he wants to accomplish, but he's heartless and he is cruel to those that he conquers. He's just cruel. Woe number 4 is in verses 15 through 18 of chapter 2. He delights in shaming and humiliating those he conquers. And God says, you made them drink this cup, didn't you? Just to shame them and then to laugh about it. You're going to drink the same cup, because now I'm going to have someone conquer you and they're going to make you drink the cup. And you're going to be shamed and humiliated. So that's woe number 4, because they take a joy in, I guess, pulverizing, humiliating other people. And then in verse 19, woe number 5, they serve worthless idols. Those that are made of wood and those that are made of metal, and they are nothing. They are nothing, but they worship them anyway. And so they give credit to not the God of heaven. Now, if you go back to the book of Daniel, finally Nebuchadnezzar got the message when God put him in a field, but that's another book and a kind of a sidetrack there. But this is the same kind of story interwoven. 5 woes. I'm going to, how do you punish God's people who are holy, really they're unholy, with a pagan nation? Well, I'm going to turn around, I'm going to punish them. And he gives the 5 woes. Now, I want us to think about this. Even though this is all going on, even though the wickedness is going on in the nation, and even though a pagan nation is going to come and going to punish his people, he said in chapter 2 and verse 4, at the end of that verse, chapter 2 and verse 4, the just shall live by faith. You're going to have faith in God. You're going to keep living for God through all of this. You're going to still remain faithful to God. Is this going to be hard? It's going to be hard. Is it going to be a punishment that everybody's going to be under? Yeah, they're going to be taken captive. They're going to see a lot of dead bodies laying on the ground. They're people. There's going to be some horrible things they're going to have to see, but the just keeps on living for God, keeps having faith in God, and they are still going to do His will as God actually is doing His. Their trust in God. Now, remember chapter 2 and verse 1. After he made this complaint, he said, now I'm going to sit here up in this tower, and I'm going to wait, and I'm going to see how God answers this, and I'm going to see how I'm going to answer God. He writes in chapter 2 and verse 20, it is written, the Lord is in His holy temple. Let all the earth keep silent before Him. What do you think that's saying? Okay. God is God. I'm not. I'm just going to button my lip. God's going to take care of this. I don't know exactly how He's going to do this. I don't know exactly when He's going to do this. He said it's going to be soon. It's coming. And I don't know why He's taking this pagan nation to punish His people who are not living right. I don't understand all that. He's perplexed about all these things. 2 complaints. I just need to be quiet and let God be God. I think and we'll get into that, but let's look at chapter 3 here. I'm going to read a portion of this. Now we're reading a prayer song that Habakkuk, the prophet. Now he's labeled a prophet twice in this book, so we know he's a prophet. But look at the very end of verse 19. To the chief musician with my stringed instruments. So this is exactly what you'd see at the end of a psalm, just like Psalms 100 through 1 through 150. A lot of those end like that, or they have it as a footnote, maybe at the beginning. Obviously, this is a prayer to God, but it's put to song. And G.C. Finley had this to say. He said, it is a splendid ode, a meditation of the grandeur of Jehovah. It is a masterpiece in Hebrew poetry. But what this is all about, this prayer is about, God has worked in the past, and God is getting ready that He's going to take care of this in the near future. And so he's talking about God being an advocate for His people. Let's read a little bit of this in chapter 3, beginning at verse 2. Lord, you've heard your speech, or I've heard your speech. I was afraid. O Lord, revive your work in the midst of the years. In the midst of your years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy. What's 3 things in verse 2 that he's asking God in this prayer song? What's his plea? Or 2, at least 2 in here. What's that? Okay, revive your work. Okay. God, you revive your work, but have mercy when judgment comes. Have mercy on us, your people. So it's basically revive your work and have mercy. It starts out, and now he talks about, and I'm not going to read all of this, but he said God came, verse 3, God came from Teman, the Holy One from the Mount of Paran. His glory covered the heavens. The earth was full of His praise. His brightness was like the light. He had rays flashing from His hand. There was power that was hidden. Before Him went pestilence. Fever followed at His feet. He stood. He measured the earth. It looked and startled the nations. The everlasting mountains were scattered. The perpetual hills bowed. His ways are everlasting. He's putting this in poetic language, but he's talking about, when God acts, you know, it's kind of like E.F. Hutton, that commercial. When E.F. Hutton talks, everybody listens. You know, whoa, God is active. Now, what was the first complaint? God, when are you going to do something? When are you going to do something? Well, in chapter 3 and verse 3, God, he talks about God came in the past, and he talks about the action words. Now, I'm not going to give all of these to you, but I mean, he has it chocked full of action verbs. What is he saying about God? I think the same thing when we studied Daniel about 2 Sunday nights ago. God is never passive. He is never passive. God is always active. And we need to understand that. I don't have to see it. I don't have to feel it. I don't have to understand it. But God is acting all the time on behalf of his will and his people that are included in that will. He uses words like he covered, he followed, he measured, he looked, he rode, he pulled his bow, he divided the rivers when he shot the bow, he marched, he trampled, he went forth, he struck the head of the wicked, he thrust them through, and you walked God. Now these are just a few of those action verbs which come back to our very first complaint is, God, when are you going to do something? Well, God has always been doing something. You just aren't able to see it. You're not able to feel it. Sometimes you have that feeling, don't you? Why am I here praying this prayer over and over again, and it seems like God is just not listening? Now, that's the book of Psalms, half of them at least. David said, you're not listening. You're not doing anything. God's will is churning. It just hasn't hit the judgment part yet. But it's coming. And I think we got it in a nutshell in this book again, is that God is always active. And God is acting. He said, I am working, and the Chaldeans are coming. It's going to be true. Why does he do this? Well, look at verse 13 of chapter 3. You went forth for the salvation of your people, for your salvation with your anointed. Why is God carrying out this will? On behalf of his people. God has this relationship with his people, and everything in that will is for their betterment. Yeah, they're going to be punished. Yes, those that are wicked among his people are going to die. And yes, he's going to punish that pagan nation as well, but he's going to bring his people back. And so he did it all. He does it all. God, in his will, gracious will, goodness of his will, includes his people. That's an Old Testament thought, but it's also a New Testament thought as well, as we know. What was the response of the creation when God worked in this poetic prayer song? Well, verse 10 and 11. The mountains saw you, and they trembled. There was overflowing of the water. It passed by. The deep uttered its voice, and it lifted its hands on high. Sun and moon stood still in their habitation. And the light of your arrows, they went at the shining of your glittering spear. God, in his action, set the creation in woe. It stilled the sun and the moon. It shook the mountains. Why? Because God has spoken. God is active, and that is what's happening. Okay, now here is a good part here in verses 16, 17. Or let's go through 16 through 19. When I heard my body tremble, my lips quivered at the voice. Rottenness entered my bones, and I trembled in myself, that I might rest in the day of trouble. When it comes up to the people, he will invade them with his troops. Though the fig tree may not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, though the labor of the olive may fail, and the fields yield no food, though the flock may be cut off from the fold, and there is no herd in the stalls. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. The Lord is my strength. He will make my feet like deer's feet, and He will make me walk on high heels. He's basically saying there, God is going to act, and I'm going to be a part of this judgment. But when there's nothing left, I'm still going to rejoice in God, because God is my strength, and He will make my feet strong, like some deer going up the side of a hill, the side of a mountain. They'll be strong and stable, because His faith, the just shall live by faith. God is going to be true to His plan, but I'm going to be true to God. And so it's very poetic, very beautiful ending there, isn't it? Very encouraging. Any comments you want to say on that before we get into the 16 lessons we can learn from this? Anything? Yes. Even that's a good point that God predicted when His people became unfaithful, they were going to be punished by a nation, some nation. And even Nehemiah, in Nehemiah chapter 1, when he offered up the prayer to God to go back and rebuild the wall of the city of Jerusalem, he goes back to that promise. He said, God, you promised that if those people, you said you were going to punish them, and you have, just like you promised. But now you also made the promise that if they turn back to you, you will bring them back. And that's what I'm counting on and praying this prayer all about. And so Nehemiah is going on those very promises of understanding God will punish His wicked nation, but He also will, when they repent, will bring them back and to future glory. Very good. Anything else? That's true. It's going to get really bad. And they're going to burn your cities, kill your people. Just have faith. The plan is going to work out. They're going to be brought back eventually. But God is always going to be their God, even in the captivity. That's where Ezekiel dealt with them, and Daniel. Yes. God is not only active, but He's sovereign, and His will be done. All I need to do is decide, am I going to be, Romans chapter 9, verse 11 and following, am I going to be a vessel of wrath or a vessel of mercy? If I will be yielding as a vessel of mercy, God will have mercy on me and use me in that way. If I want to be like the Pharaoh or like the Babylonians, then I will be a vessel of wrath. I'll accomplish exactly what God wants, and then he's going to punish me. So, you know, it's really, we got a choice in this. God's will is going to be done. Am I going to have some faith in it, in him, that he is going to accomplish what he has always set out to do for his people? It's okay to ask questions, folks. These questions were sincere, but don't remain there. Okay? Look how he ends this. He writes a song to the praise and glory of God. And says, when everything's said and done and there's nothing left, I'm still going to rejoice in God. You might say his faith was elevated in all of this, but sometimes we're going to be perplexed, and that's okay. We're human beings, and you ever go visit in a hospital and see little children suffering and people that are going to die and they're going to leave children behind? You'll be perplexed in those settings, and you may not understand all the answers, but those are questions that we as humans ask, and so did David and Job in the Scripture. God is in control. He seems silent. Lesson number 2. He seems silent. He seems silent in your life, but his plan is working in your life. You just got to keep having faith. Lesson number 3, sin will be punished. It was punished among God's people. It was punished among the Babylonians, the Chaldeans. Justice, God is a just God. Not only is he a sovereign God, he is a just God. And it may seem to be ignored when you read the front paper or when you look and Google the news and you think, wow, look at the terrible things that are happening. You think God doesn't see that? He does, and it will be punished, whether through a court of law or through some divine thing that he's going to do. We do not know, but he will do it. It will not be ignored. He is just. Number 4 is we may not understand how or why God works the way he does, but I think you look at Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9. His ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. Number 5, I've just mentioned this. God will use vessels of honor or vessels of mercy. And vessels of mercy or vessels of wrath. Romans 9, verse 11. He's going to carry out his will. You just need to decide, do you want to be on the good end or the bad end? All up to you. Number 6, destruction is not forever. It will happen in our day and lifetime. Think about the people who saw the Holocaust. Do you think they ever thought that was going to end, what they were doing to those people? I cannot imagine. As you read stuff like Diary of Anne Frank, and you read things that Corrie ten Boom wrote about what it was like to be in a concentration camp. I have never experienced anything to that magnitude. I have experienced things of suffering, but not to that magnitude. But destruction is not forever. Neither will this be. Number 7, we need to wait on God's answers. Habakkuk said that in chapter 2, verse 1, and then he came to the conclusion, chapter 3, verse 19, I will rejoice because God is my strength. But he waited. Number 8, God promises that he will keep his promise. It will come. I will not lie. It is not a lie what I'm telling you. Chapter 2, verse 3. Number 10 and number 9, Jehovah will punish the prideful and upright leaders. They may have their day. Every dog has their day. But when it's all said and done, God will put them away. The unjust leaders of our nation or any nation will be put away one day. Okay, the other 6, we'll stop. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your comments. And thank God for his word.